An FBI agent pulled over, handcuffed and humiliated, all because a cop refused to believe a black woman could hold the badge. But what he didn't know was she wasn't just any agent, and his downfall had already begun the moment he said, "Step out of the car, stay until the end." Because justice doesn't always knock, sometimes it kicks the door in. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now let's get into the story. It was supposed to be just another drive home, a warm afternoon in Charlotte, the kind that made the city shimmer beneath a golden haze. Traffic crawled, but the sky was clear, and for once Special Agent Maya Collins felt like she could breathe. Her latest case, a months-long operation unraveling a multi-state fentanyl network, had finally reached a turning point. She had spent years climbing through a world that doubted her at every turn, and yet here she was, a black woman in her late 30s, badge on her hip, and a reputation in the FBI built not on politics but precision. Maya wasn't in uniform today. She didn't need to be. Her blazer was tossed onto the passenger seat, her ID clipped inside. She was driving her own car, an older SUV that blended in just enough to make her forget about the weight she usually carried. Her mind raced through the puzzle pieces of her case. She was on the verge of a break, and then everything shifted. Flashing lights in the rear-view mirror. She frowned. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't changed lanes erratically. She wasn't on her phone. Still, she pulled over, calm but confused, her fingers already moving toward the glove compartment where her license and FBI credentials sat side by side. She looked in the mirror as the officer approached, tall, white, late 40s, heavy-set, with mirrored sunglasses and a swagger that felt less like protocol and more like performance. License and registration, he barked before even greeting her. Maya blinked, startled by his tone. Good afternoon, officer. May I ask what I was pulled over for? The man didn't answer. His name plate read Bell. Officer Bell. He didn't look at her face, he looked at her skin, her hoodie, her natural curls pulled back in a tight bun. I said, license and registration. She didn't flinch. She reached calmly into her purse and pulled out her badge, holding it alongside her license. I'm a federal agent, FBI. I'm currently on duty. Actually, don't play games with me. His voice cut her off like a slap. Badge looks fake. Anyone can buy one online. Her heart rate ticked upward, not from fear, from fury. She couldn't show. Sir, she said evenly, that's a federal credential. You can call my field office right now and confirm it. But Officer Bell wasn't interested in confirming anything. His hand moved to the grip of his holstered weapon. Step out of the vehicle. Maya's breath caught. I'm sorry, on what grounds? He leaned down close enough for her to see the lines around his sneer. Failure to comply. Step out. She knew what was happening, the flash of resistance in his posture, the refusal to engage with her words. She had been trained for high-stress encounters, but nothing prepared her for the humiliation of being disbelieved for simply existing. As she stepped out slowly, she kept her hands visible. I am not resisting. I'm asking you to verify my credentials. You're making a mistake. Turn around. Hands on the hood. He grabbed her arm, not roughly enough to injure, just enough to dominate. People were beginning to slow their cars, watching a black woman in cuffs alone. Accused, what's the charge? She asked, her voice still controlled. You tell me, Bell replied, impersonating a federal officer. That's it. Felony, isn't it? The handcuffs clicked tight, deliberate. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, not from fear but from fury. Buried under a lifetime of training, she thought of her first day at Quantico, of being one of only 3 black women in her class, of the warning another black agent once whispered to her, they won't always see the badge before they see your skin. Now here she was, pressed against her own car in her own city, silenced by a man who chose to see a suspect instead of a colleague. Bell shoved her into the back of the patrol car without another word. The hard plastic seat felt colder than it should have. She tried again. Call Agent Carla Dean at the Charlotte field office. She will confirm who I am. But Bell wasn't listening. He sat in the driver's seat with the kind of smugness that made Maya's stomach turn. Save it for the judge. As they pulled onto the road, Maya looked out at the passing city. The same city she had protected, investigated, and sacrificed for. Now she watched it from behind a barrier, cuffed and criminalized. Her phone buzzed in her bag. Untouched, her gun locked in her bureau, issued safe. Thank God. Her identity stripped in a matter of minutes by a man who saw a hoodie before he saw humanity. She had seen this happen before. She had read the cases, watched the videos, marched in the protests, but she never imagined she'd be on this side of the power dynamic, punished not because she broke the law but because someone refused to believe she was the law. As the car pulled into a small precinct on the outskirts of town, she steadied herself. This was not the end. This would not be the story they got to tell. She was not afraid, not broken, but she was done waiting to be recognized. The next move was hers, and it would change everything. The room Maya Collins was dragged into had no windows. A single fluorescent light buzzed above, flickering every few seconds like a reminder that the space was forgotten. Just like the truth, Officer Bell was trying to bury the cinder block walls. Closed in with a sterile chill, but Maya kept her back straight, her eyes focused. She had sat across from murder suspects, cartel bosses, and informants with more secrets than names, but now she was the one being treated like a threat, and that was the most dangerous irony of all. Across from her sat Officer Bell, posture casual, power inflated by the silence between them. He wasn't asking questions, he was asserting control, the kind of control that didn't need words, that fed on intimidation, that thrived in the absence of accountability. Maya said nothing at first, her hands still cuffed behind her back began to ache, but she didn't ask for relief. She knew Bell was waiting for that, some sign of submission, discomfort, anything that would validate his decision to dehumanize her, but she gave him nothing. You think you're above this, huh? He finally muttered, his tone edged with contempt. Flashing a fake badge claiming to be FBI. That's bold. Maya met his gaze without blinking. That badge wasn't fake, and you're going to regret not listening when you had the chance. He smirked. The only thing I regret is not towing your car. The door creaked open and a younger officer stepped in, nervous, clipboard in hand. His name tag read, Officer Keegan. He couldn't have been more than 30, his face marked not by authority but by uncertainty. She's clean, Keegan said, glancing between Maya and Bell. No warrants, no record. Her ID is legitimate. Bell stiffened. You sure? Keegan nodded, swallowing. Yes, sir, and the name, it matches the Bureau's records. She is Special Agent Maya Collins, Charlotte Division. For a split second, silence swallowed the room. Bell's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes flickered, doubt maybe, or fear that the story was beginning to unravel. But pride is a strange thing, especially in men like Bell. It doesn't yield to truth, it fights it. You ran that through the right channels? He asked, still trying to hold on. Keegan nodded. Yes, sir, directly with their field office. They're expecting her to check in this afternoon, Agent Carla Dean confirmed. Everything. Maya finally spoke. I told you that an hour ago. Bell looked at her now, not with the confidence of a man in control, but the calculation of one who just made a mistake too big to bury. His next move would determine everything. She still gave me attitude at the stop, he muttered. Didn't cooperate. That's resisting. Keegan hesitated, his eyes shifting nervously. Sir, I saw the dash cam footage. She was calm. She complied. Bell's face flushed red, his hand clenching the file in front of him. She didn't belong in that neighborhood. You and I both know what this really is. And there it was, the confession, not in words but in tone, the unspoken truth that Maya had known from the moment he tapped on her window. She wasn't pulled over for a violation. She was profiled, judged, humiliated because of who she was and how she looked. But now the walls were cracking. Maya leaned forward, her voice low but clear. I'm not here to ruin your life, Officer Bell, but you've put yourself in this position the minute you decided to ignore my credentials, escalate a situation that didn't exist, and put your hands on a federal agent. You didn't just violate protocol, you exposed something much deeper. Bell looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. Instead, he stood and stormed out, the door slamming behind him like a gavel. Keegan remained still, holding his clipboard as if it could shield him from the truth hanging in the air. Maya looked at him. How long have you worked with him? Too long, Keegan admitted quietly. Then you've seen this before. He nodded slowly, but no one ever said anything. We just learned to avoid it, keep our heads down. Maya didn't judge him. She understood the pressure of silence and systems built on power. Imbalance, but she also knew the cost of that silence. She was living it now. Have a choice, she said softly. You don't have to be him, you don't have to. Protect him. Keegan didn't reply, but he didn't look away either. Later, as Maya sat in a different room waiting for her colleagues to arrive, her mind spun through the events like a silent film, each frame laced with rage, restraint, and responsibility. She knew she could go public. She knew the press would devour the story of a black FBI agent being arrested without cause, but that wasn't the endgame. She wanted change, not spectacle. This wasn't about one bad cop, it was about every shadow he operated in, every look the other officers gave when he overstepped, every report ignored, every civilian too afraid to speak. And now the spotlight was coming. She could feel it. And Bell, he was finally in it. The hallway outside the holding room was dim, lined with bulletin boards filled with outdated announcements and faded photographs from departmental picnics long past. Officer Keegan stood by one of those boards, staring at a black and white photo of a former precinct chief, shaking hands with a city councilman. Neither of them looked like him. Neither of them looked like Maya Collins. He could still hear the sound of the door slamming from earlier, Officer Bell's fury echoing in his bones. Something had shifted inside him. He had spent years rationalizing, telling himself that certain behaviors were just stress, that older officers had grown up in a different time, that his job wasn't to question but to serve. It was easier that way, simpler. But today, after watching a woman in handcuffs maintain more professionalism than the man who put her there, he could no longer pretend ignorance was neutral. Guilt wasn't new to Keegan. It had come in waves before, after seeing Bell search teenagers without probable cause, after hearing jokes in the locker room that made his stomach twist. But this time was different. This time the person they humiliated wasn't just anyone. She was law enforcement, a federal agent. She had done everything right, and it hadn't mattered. That was what haunted him the most. Keegan turned and walked toward the small office he shared with two other patrol officers. Inside, he shut the door quietly and sat down. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he opened his drawer and pulled out a flash drive. It was standard issue, used for backing up reports, storing case files, but he had started keeping something else on it: footage, moments from the dash cam and body cam feeds that didn't sit right with him, interactions that crossed a line. He had never shown them to anyone, never even spoken about them. But now, with Agent Collins still in a room down the hall and Bell pacing like a caged animal, Keegan knew he had to make a choice. He slid the drive into his laptop and opened the folder. There it was, footage from earlier that day, the traffic stop, the arrest, the way Maya remained calm while Bell escalated with every word. Keegan watched it again, this time not as a cop but as a witness, and it burned down the hall. Maya sat alone. They had uncuffed her, but the red marks on her wrists lingered. She rubbed them gently, her expression unreadable. Her phone had been returned, but she hadn't used it yet. She was waiting for backup, for protocol, for justice to make its slow, grueling turn. When Keegan entered the room, she didn't flinch. She just looked up, her eyes sharp and steady. I need to say something, he said. Maya didn't respond. She let him speak. I should have stepped in sooner. I saw what was happening. I've seen it before and I let it happen again. She didn't soften. Why are you here now? He hesitated. Because this time I couldn't look away. Maya nodded once. Then don't just say it, do something. Keegan placed the flash drive on the table. This has the footage, not just from today but from the last 6 months. Things Bell did, stops that never made it into reports. You're not the first. Maya stared at the drive. It was small, unassuming, but she knew the weight it carried. I'll back you up, Keegan continued. I'll testify if I have to. I know the risks, but I can't wear this badge and pretend anymore. For the first time since her arrest, Maya let her shoulders relax just slightly, not in relief but in recognition. Change didn't come from guilt, it came from courage. And Keegan, trembling as he was, had finally found some. You'll need to file an internal statement, she said, officially, and make a copy of that drive. Keep one for yourself. Keegan nodded. And you'll need protection, she added, because when systems are threatened they fight back. He met her gaze. I know, but I'd rather be scared for doing the right thing than ashamed for staying quiet. They sat in silence. After that, two people from different worlds, one black, one white, one federal, one local, but bound now by truth. And somewhere between that silence and the rustling of paper outside the door, something rare bloomed in that Stale fluorescent room, not redemption that was still miles away, but accountability, the first spark of it, and Maya, who had walked into this station. Target now saw the beginning of a shift not just in Keegan but in the structure. He was brave enough to challenge change she knew always began in the shadows, but today it had stepped into the light. The next 48 hours moved like a current, swift and irreversible by the time Maya Collins walked back into the precinct. This time accompanied by 3 agents from the Department of Justice, she was no longer just a wronged individual. She was an emblem of accountability, and the weight she carried wasn't personal vengeance but institutional reckoning. The precinct felt colder, quieter. There was no laughter in the halls, no casual greetings. Whispers slipped through doorways like smoke, cautious and wary. Everyone knew news traveled fast, especially when it involved one of your own, but what had once been swept under desks and tucked into silence was now front and center with files in hand and eyes wide open. Officer Keegan stood at the end of the hallway as Maya passed. He offered a small nod, one of resolve, not apology. Maya returned it. It was all that needed to be said between them. He had delivered more than a statement. He had surrendered every comfort of neutrality and stood fully exposed on the right side of history, and in doing so he had sparked a fire that no precinct wall could contain. Inside the internal affairs interview room, Agent Collins took her seat with calm precision. A federal recorder clicked on. Across from her sat the Deputy Inspector General, 2 investigators, and a representative from the city's Office of Civil Rights. They weren't here for posturing. They were here to listen, and Maya had come prepared to speak. She laid out every detail, not just of her arrest but of the countless subtle violations that had built up to it, the coded language, the unchecked hostility, the racial undertones that had long operated beneath polished badges and scripted apologies. But she didn't stop there. She presented Keegan's footage, time-stamped and compiled, not edited, not manipulated, just truth, raw and undeniable. The footage revealed more than just one bad officer. It captured a system of complicity, fellow cops who looked away, superiors who signed off without questions, community complaints buried under administrative jargon. It wasn't a rogue act, it was culture, and the camera didn't flinch while investigators reviewed the footage. Maya stepped outside into the concrete courtyard of the precinct. The sun was blinding, and she welcomed it. For the first time since that humiliating traffic stop, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, not because justice had been served, it hadn't, not yet, but because the machine had finally paused long enough to see itself. Captain Riley, a veteran officer and one of the few women to hold a leadership role at the precinct, approached her. Maya hadn't seen her during the ordeal, and now under sunlight instead of surveillance their exchange was unguarded. "I want to say I'm sorry," Riley said, hands behind her back, shoulders squared like someone bracing for impact. "I don't need your apology," Maya replied, her tone measured but not unkind. "I need your cooperation." Riley nodded. "You have it. Bell's been put on administrative leave pending investigation, but I know how deep this runs. I've seen it too. I've been afraid of what pushing back might cost me." "It always costs something," Maya said. "But the real debt comes when we don't." They stood there, 2 women in uniform, both shaped by institutions that too often demanded silence in exchange for survival. But in that moment neither of them was silent, and neither was backing down. Meanwhile, across town the first reports were already reaching the mayor's office. The footage had been sent anonymously to a news station which had confirmed its authenticity within hours. It was viral, not the sensationalized headlines Maya feared, but the kind of journalism that made people uncomfortable for the right reasons, the kind that forced morning anchors to say words like implicit bias, abuse of authority, and systemic racism on national airwaves. That same evening Maya received a call from the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. They commended her composure, they assured her support, but more importantly, they asked for her input, not just on handling Bell's misconduct but on how to prevent incidents like it from happening again. It was a start back at the precinct. Keegan sat in an empty locker room, staring at the cracked mirror. His reflection looked older, tired, but honest. He had been interviewed for 3 hours, and each word he gave pulled him further from the brotherhood he once clung to. He had no idea what tomorrow held, but today he had done something that mattered. The uniform he wore had once Been a shield, something to protect, to honor, but now he understood truth wore the same fabric, stitched not with silence but with courage. As night fell, Maya stood before her hotel window overlooking the skyline. Lights blinked across the city, like heartbeats, each one a reminder that this fight wasn't new and it wasn't hers alone, but it was hers to carry forward. She didn't feel like a victim anymore. She didn't even feel like a symbol. She felt like a woman who had chosen to speak up, and in doing so had cracked open a wall that had stood untouched for too long. Tomorrow there would be more meetings, more interviews, maybe even backlash, but for now she allowed herself one truth to rest on: when accountability wears a uniform, it can change the world. The courtroom was quiet, but the silence was electric. Every breath felt like it might shatter it. A dozen news cameras waited outside, their lenses pointed toward the heavy oak doors. Inside, Agent Maya Collins sat straight-backed on the witness stand, her hands resting gently in her lap, her face composed but resolute. This was not just a hearing about misconduct, it was a national conversation finding its voice through her testimony. Across the room sat Officer Thomas Bell. His face was pale, stripped of the confidence he wore like a badge. No uniform today, just a suit that didn't fit quite right, and a defense attorney who looked more like a damage control consultant than someone fighting for innocence. He didn't meet Maya's eyes. He couldn't not. After everything, the prosecutor's questions were calm but piercing. Agent Collins, at what point did you realize the arrest was not about procedure but prejudice? Maya didn't hesitate the moment Officer Bell refused to acknowledge my credentials and escalated the situation without cause. He didn't see a federal agent, he saw a black woman he believed he could control. A murmur moved through the gallery. Maya continued, her voice unwavering. It wasn't the first time I'd felt that kind of dismissal, but it was the first time it came with handcuffs and threats. And I'm here not just because I want justice for myself, but because I want to make sure no other agent, no other woman, no other human being ever has to be dehumanized behind a badge. She let the words settle, not with bitterness, with intention. Officer Bell's defense team tried to pivot. They leaned into confusion, stress, standard protocol, but every claim unraveled under scrutiny. The footage from Officer Keegan's body cam had left little room for doubt, and Keegan's own testimony had been clear. What happened wasn't just procedural failure, it was moral collapse. But beyond the trial, something deeper was shifting. Maya's case had sparked policy reviews in precincts across the country. The Department of Justice had launched a broader initiative on racial bias training, citing her case as a catalyst. And quietly at the agency where Maya worked, more black and brown voices began stepping forward, telling their stories, not in fear but in solidarity. Justice, Maya had come to understand, didn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it came slowly in rooms like this one, rooms where truth echoed louder than excuses. As the trial moved into its final statements, Maya sat beside her legal team, composed and thoughtful. She wasn't waiting for vindication, she had already found it in the courage of Officer Keegan, in the silence of Captain Riley that had finally broken in the community that now stood behind her. Not with hashtags but with action. The jury returned within hours. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts: misconduct, false arrest, abuse of authority. But the sentence in some ways mattered less than what followed. At a press conference days later, Maya stood before a crowd of reporters. She wore her badge that day not as armor but as a reminder of what it was supposed to mean, of what it had always meant to her. I didn't become an FBI agent to be a symbol, she said into the microphones. I became one because I believed in justice, and today I still do. But let's be clear, justice doesn't whisper, it doesn't hide, and it doesn't wait for permission. It speaks up even when it's inconvenient. It demands better even when systems resist, and sometimes it starts with just one voice refusing to stay silent. Her words rang out not just in that moment but far beyond it, in precincts where officers began re-examining how they interacted with the public, in law schools where future prosecutors dissected her case as a modern turning point, in households where young black girls saw Maya Collins and believed, maybe for the first time, that they belonged in spaces of power without apology, and at her own agency, where leadership invited her to co-develop a new national training model, one built not on hollow diversity slogans but on lived experience and human truth. Maya accepted, but with one Condition I don't want my name on it, I want my impact in it. She meant it. She didn't need spotlight, she needed transformation. Back in Atlanta, Maya walked the same street she had driven down that day, her city now the backdrop for a reckoning that had reached far beyond its borders. Children waved at her, strangers nodded with recognition and quiet gratitude, and her fellow agents didn't just look at her with respect, they looked at her with understanding. The story didn't end in the courtroom, it didn't end with a press release, it continued in every conversation that dared to ask, what kind of justice are we building and who is it truly for? And Maya would keep asking that question in every room she entered until silence was no longer the default, because justice doesn't whisper, it speaks through those brave enough to raise their voice. Maya Collins's story is not just about an unjust arrest, it's about a confrontation with a system that too often silences the truth, and a woman who refused to let that silence win. What began as a routine drive through the city she served became a catalyst for change, a personal ordeal that evolved into a national conversation. Maya, a black female FBI agent at the top of her game, found herself handcuffed not because of a crime but because of a uniform that couldn't see past her skin. Her dignity, her authority, her identity dismissed in seconds by Officer Thomas Bell, who saw her not as a colleague in law enforcement but as a threat. But what Bell didn't see was Maya's strength. He didn't see the decades of history she carried, the generations before her who had fought to sit at tables of power. He didn't see the leadership and integrity that made her one of the FBI's most respected agents, and he didn't see what would happen when she stood up not just for herself but for every person who had ever been made to feel invisible in a room where they belonged. What unfolded after that moment wasn't revenge, it was accountability. It was Maya choosing truth over fear, using the very systems that had failed her to spotlight the rot within them. With courage and clarity, she exposed a culture of casual racism and unchecked authority, but more than that, she sparked reform. She didn't just fight back, she built forward. By choosing not to remain silent, she ensured her story would become more than a headline. It became a blueprint for how real change begins, with someone brave enough to speak when it's hardest. Maya's journey reminds us that justice is not always loud, sometimes it walks quietly beside us until a moment demands we give it a voice. Her refusal to accept humiliation, her insistence on truth, and her empathy for those who watched and stayed silent, even them, became the foundation of a movement not based in anger but in resolve. The lesson from Maya's story is this: power is not always about position, it's about purpose. You don't need a title to fight injustice, you need eyes open to what's wrong and the will to do something about it. Whether you're a teacher, a store clerk, a student, or an officer yourself, your silence protects no one, but your voice can uplift everyone. And it's not just about confronting injustice when it's on the news, it's about everyday choices. Do you speak up when someone is dismissed unfairly? Do you challenge systems that reward comfort over truth? Do you listen, truly listen, when someone tells you their experience, even if it makes you uncomfortable? That's how change starts, not with grand gestures but with human moments, with honesty, with allyship, with courage that doesn't need a stage to be real. So if this story moved you, if Maya's strength reminded you of your own or of someone you know, don't let it end here. Be the kind of person who listens, who reflects, who acts, and help keep these conversations alive, not just online but in real life where they matter most. And if you believe stories like Maya's deserve to be told, stories that challenge the norm, confront the uncomfortable, and inspire real transformations, support this channel. Hit the subscribe button. It's a small action with big meaning, because when you subscribe, you're not just boosting numbers, you're backing truth, courage, and the people who refuse to stay silent. There's more to come, more stories that matter, more voices that need to be heard, and with your support we'll keep telling them. Subscribe now and let's stand for something